This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Alan Halas from the website breakingandentering.net. Welcome to the
Thank,
Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How are you doing tonight?
thank you for having me. I'm doing really well. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. We love to talk to musicians. As I said, we've been a podcaster for since 2016, and we started talking to people in the music scene, whether or not they were showrunners or producers or musicians themselves. And then we
Mhm,
branched out to like everybody in the arts.
for
But it's
sure.
always good back to talk to people involved in the scene itself. And
Mhm,
every musician is a music fan, as we discussed. And so we love to just have these kind of discussions of the music genre of the whole experience of supporting musicians. So it sounds like we're going to get into that tonight. So uh, before we dive into that, I always ask people on the show what motivates you and why you do what you do.
Oh, that's a good one right off the bat. What motivates me for sure is I right now currently I'll tell you what motivates me is that I went to Marquette University. I went to a school that was very let's say privileged. A lot of students that had financial backing and parents that were very successful and things like that. I'm a first generation college student, first generation entrepreneur that really had my own business. So that's probably what fires me up is to kind of prove to myself and some other people that I can still, I can do it. I can do this thing. And that's probably what keeps me going. And that's, why I haven't given up yet.
Well, that's interesting because, yeah, I'm a first generation going to college. I went to Bowdoin College, a similar
Mhm.
kind of scenario that was full of a lot of elites.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
and I came from a blue collar. My father was a salesman, so you know, yeah, it was just interesting to try to being an entrepreneur myself in terms of the podcast space. I think we always want to bring our ideas to light. We want to be able to self actualize. Um,
Mhm.
and just I just think it's an experience when you own your own vision, right?
Right. Yeah, and like I mean I should say too, there is also like we primarily cover music in our home market in Milwaukee, and there's an immense amount of talent here that just doesn't get the exposure that it needs to.
Hmm.
So that is also a big factor of it. But I mean, in terms of just me personally, that is what fires me up is to say I'm going to make something of this thing.
That's important because I think the world has changed. I'm a child of the '70s, and I'm very familiar with previously in the old days of the radio, right? There were markets, and there would be
Mhm.
bands that would break from these markets. You had the
Yeah.
Boston market, Chicago market, LA market. You have these scenes that would come out of these like different markets. And now because we've gone to with like the streaming and the kind of internet, that people have forgotten about like the scene. Like
Mhm.
it's like if there's a Milwaukee scene or like there was a Minneapolis scene with like replacements and Who's Do
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
SST. Yeah,
Yeah.
I was a big fan of stuff like that.
Yeah, very much so. And to be very honest, like we're a city of 500,000 people, and everybody in the music scene kind of knows somebody, or if they don't know you, they know someone who knows you, kind of thing. Like we're very insular in that way, and that can be for better or for worse. And so, but yeah, like I said, an immense amount of talent that just really doesn't get to see the as much of the light of day as they should yet. So.
So in terms of the type of genres that are in this scene,
Mhm.
what are the primary genres in the Milwaukee scene?
Primary genres, there's definitely a lot of hip hop that gets made here, but there's a lot of indie rock that is really, really good. A lot of alternative stuff. Thriving punk scene right now that is really good. So, I mean, it really does run the gamut. And like, I've operated my website for a little over 10 years now. And really, like, I've discovered it's kind of like in pockets all over the city. Like, one neighborhood might be, predominantly known for being a hip hop space, and one
Mhm.
might be a more like artsy kind of hip hop. Like, there's like the north side of the city has a very more like street oriented hip hop scene, but then like the east side has a little bit more of like the like poetic, like stylish guys. The
Mhm.
south side's got some punks. They got a punk band scene and like Walker's Point and I live in Bayview, which is kind of like an artist neighborhood that has a lot of, there's two really like art hubs, I would say like River West and Bayview and Milwaukee. And both of those scenes are really eclectic. Like you might have people making hip hop there, or people making, rock, indie rock there. And it just all kind of blends together once you can get them out of those pockets initially.
That's interesting. So your website allows all those genres to kind of coexist on the same platform?
Yeah, exactly. And so you could be, and it's really only based on, we have two sections. One is Milwaukee and one is everywhere else. So if you want to just find a new band from Milwaukee, you can do that and you can scroll through, but on the way, you might find a hip hop record that you like, or you might find like a reggae record that you like, or, we've got a sparse amount of like country. So like there's a little bit of everything and some electronic stuff too. There's a really prevalent like internet heavy, like hyper pop and electronic scene. So like as you're scrolling through our site, you just discover all these different pieces, and it kind of all like really hopefully hypes you up on just what is capable coming out of Milwaukee.
How do you curate? Do you have people like do reviews or interviews with the bands, or what do you do on the website?
Yeah, so it's myself and there's a few contributors, and for the contributors, I ask them to just cover the things you like, cover the artists that you like. I want them to go out and discover new music. For me, because I've known so many people at this point, I know when something is important when it's coming out, and I look through a lot of Spotify. I dig through Bandcamp, but we also get a ton of submissions that get sent to our email all the time, and sometimes they just completely blow me away. It's just people that are like, I've never heard of them before. They're making something great in their basement, and I'm like, let's put them out there. Let's let people see what they're up to.
Are there indie record labels in your area that actually kind of work with you, or is that everybody kind of doing it themselves?
For the most part, it's DIY. There are some labels that kind of like, I would say they act as a label in some respects. There is one very true one, Triple I Industries, that they put out, like they will put out vinyl records for you. They will help market your music. They're an indie label. There's a few other like Beer City Records and a few other things like that. But then there's also like clicks that kind of all promote each other. There's
like
a group called Passion. Yeah, there's a hip hop group called Passion Park Entertainment that all the artists get on their shows together. Or there's another one called Camp Shuttlesworth where it's, 4 or 5 artists, but everybody like does their own thing and they all are very supportive of each other. So they kind of function like a label, like everybody knows who they are. But in the traditional sense of like, they don't reach out to media as the label. They just reach out individually usually.
Well, that sounds like the collective kind of scene. Like if you have, it's easier to go to a club. If you're like an electronic collective, you go to a New York club, you got like 5 or 6 bands. Like, hey, we could run the whole night, right? So if you have 5 or 6 punk bands, you can have a punk night, and all these bands come and give the venue like, hey, yeah, we can actually fill this venue with our fans.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just a herd mentality sometimes, but it works.
Yeah, the collective mindset, in the indie world is always cool. I mean, you had kind of a weird collective kind of at the CBGB's kind of mindset. We had the Heads, Talking Heads, and Ramones, and all those bands. There were Television. They were all very different. Blondie, they're all kind of, but they're in that same space, kind of cross pollinating each other.
Yeah,
and that's a cool thing. So it sounds like you got that kind of thing going on in Milwaukee. That's cool.
Yeah, very much. And it's like a citywide version of it, because there was probably so many bands in that New York scene that, there was probably 40 bands in that New York scene, and we didn't hear of 20 of them,
Yeah, you heard the big ones I mentioned, but like they were all hitting CBGBs.
And in the same way, Milwaukee is kind of that way. We have a club called the Cactus Club, and then another one called X-Ray Arcade. Cactus Club is very much artist run, very community focused. And for a while there, like pre-COVID, like especially the people that I was hanging out with, we were there every week or 2 weeks to go see one of our friends perform. And, that's how it really went. And now after post-COVID, like they have a lot more touring acts coming in, but they still are focused on like, how can we get Milwaukee involved with this too? Yeah.
Because kind of like that sub pop scene, before Nirvana broke, there was tons of bands that were in the same space. They were just all in that grunge space, you know,
Right.
it living
Yeah.
like that. I remember like, SST records, like Who's to Do and Black Flag. I was like a big fan of that kind of college radio,
Yeah.
you know, that was
Yeah,
that
and honestly, the mentality here too is that if one band gets big, I've heard people say like if one of us makes it, we're all making it because they're going to discover everything. I can say that there are some bands that have seen like regional success and some bands that have toured and things like that, and it's kind of true to some extent. Like one band introduces you to the next one, or they'll play Milwaukee, or they'll take it. They'll go on tour with another Milwaukee band, and then all of a sudden, now like that group of fans, like you said, cross pollinate is a really good way to put it. And so the thought is really like if one band gets signed nationally, that might open the door for 3 or 4 more.
yeah, and then maybe you have a possibility of international tours and
Hmm.
can go to where there's a scene for that indie rock. Like if you I've heard, bands going to like, Netherlands or
Yeah,
going to
yeah, yeah.
Australia because they will dig it more, or going to Tokyo because they in Shibuya they might dig it, right? So if you could get like a group of bands, like collective that kind of hit at,
Right.
at enough of a level that you could kind of bring it to
Yeah,
another scene, if that's a
very much
possibility
so.
for.
Yeah. And I think there's also like that there used to be this mentality that you had to leave Milwaukee to get somewhere. You had to go out to the coast and do things out there. You had to move to LA, or had to try to, if you were a rapper, you had to move to Atlanta. That's not so much the case anymore. I think we've seen that recently. We've had a couple artists that have, seen some success, especially online. And they're able to, the great equalizer now is like social media, being able
Yeah.
to put your content out there and then find your people, or have it find your people, has been like immensely a game changer.
Yeah, it's kind of like you had if you thought about Princeton, like he had that Minneapolis mindset, it's like I'm not moving to LA
Right.
because I like Minneapolis, and he
Yeah.
had the name recognition to be able to stay there, right?
Yeah.
And to say I'm going to stay here because this is where I like to be, and
Right.
to have that kind of be able to stay in your hometown, and then still be able to hit that net presence, in the ether, and
Mhm.
then you could be comfortable and build your fan base and have opportunities to maybe walk outside of there but still support that scene, and it could be something that at a micro scale, if you don't live large, you can do it as an independent artist pretty convincingly for a while. I mean, I've seen a lot of independent bands stay in existence compared to being signed by labels and then getting booted off the label, and then they don't have any more prospects.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And like, I mean, reality wise, like we also live, we're all 90 minutes away from Chicago. So we are pretty close to a big,
See,
major
yeah,
media market if we really wanted to be. There's Chicago is around, Madison is an hour away. A lot of bands will do like a loop, and they'll do like, maybe Madison, the Twin Cities, come down to Chicago and then come back to Milwaukee, in
so
like a
it's so
weekender
it's
run.
so they'll tour just because touring is still kind of lifeblood of any indie band.
Yeah.
If you've got good fans that follow you and you've got a merch, and you can sell
Right.
your T-shirt, you can sell your poster, you sell your vinyl, you sell your cassette, sell your little buttons on your jacket. It's
Mhm.
it's like that whole thing is like people get. I think what happens with some of the modern music that's only streaming, right? If people lose connections to the artist, and if you've got, I grew up with vinyl, and
Right.
being able to have that vinyl connected me to like Husker Du, or connected me to Black Flag, connected me to
Yeah.
REM on IRS records, the early records. I was really brought, I would go see him in Northampton, Mass. Go see REM back in the day, or see Camper Van Beethoven, or go see Sonic Youth when they were actually
Mhm.
traveling. My friend was a photographer, and he
Yeah.
would get me backstage passes, and I saw Sonic Youth on stage.
That's
That's
awesome.
something about in that Northampton scene around Smith and Mount Holyoke. That's a cool scene.
Right.
It's still cool today to see the indie bands that come through there. You know,
Mhm, for sure. And like, I mean, we have touring acts that come here, and some that, take a liking to what we're doing. Like a Chicago band might come up here and be like, hey, we'll bring a Milwaukee band with us when we go on our regional run. So like that does happen here, and it's exciting to see it. It's the product of getting in the right rooms with the right people, and we're accessible enough that that sort of thing can happen here.
So do you like to help like be a matchmaker? Is your website about matching people with like-minded creatives, matching like
I think,
mindsets?
yeah, very unintentionally it is. Like I don't personally go out most of the time. 99% of the time I don't say, "Hey, this band would be great with this band," right? But we do put together shows. I put on shows. And when it does come to that point, I do use my own website as a reference, right? And find, bands that I do think would sound good together and put them on a show together.
Hmm.
But I never maybe explicitly go to a band and be like, hey, you guys should talk to these guys because you guys would be great together. But I think that there's certainly been the byproduct of having the website that people have discovered their band or have discovered another band in the city
Hmm.
through our site and then used that to be like, hey, to get in touch with one another and be like, hey, we're
Yeah.
kind of doing a similar thing. We would love to play a show with you.
Yeah.
Or I've
Exactly.
had actually other media outlets have literally said to me, we've discovered bands using your website. So that's kind of helpful in itself to just kind of raise the profile of Milwaukee music.
Yeah, you're kind of a conduit, whether you're explicitly trying to do it or not. If
Hmm.
you set up the space, then the people will come. You know,
Right.
we had
Exactly.
like the
Yeah.
idea back in the '60s of the happenings. Like
Yeah.
Warhol and the Velvets, and you got the Mothers of Invention. They just have these happenings. The Dead. They would have all these other bands with them. You
Right.
know, and it would
Yeah. And
just
it
be
was like,
this
you got
big
to be
scene.
there.
Yeah, you gotta be there. I mean, it'd be hours long, just 6 hours long, and all these different people, and they were
Yeah.
poets and writers and actors and painters, and it just being in a scene with creative people. The painter right there is like, "Oh, I'll do your album cover." Photographer, "I'll help you with publicity." An actor is like, "Maybe I could work with a video or something." Like, you get these opportunities with like-minded people connecting, right?
Right. And that is the case here too. There are definitely, visual artists and just creatives in general. The videographers here are amazing, and so many photographers here that are amazing that end up working with these artists. Like there's a whole scene of just hip hop artists in Milwaukee. Like if you YouTube Milwaukee rap,
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, you're going to get these videographers that have their own channels that are pretty big, but they got there because they're making like movie quality music videos, like ridiculously good quality videos for these artists that primarily live on YouTube. They don't really stream their stuff in the way that you might normally think they would
Oh,
get their
yeah.
music out there. But the videos are so good quality because the videographers are really good. So it's just a matter of people figuring out how to be good with what they got and gradually stepping their game up. So I mean there's some that are doing like some AI effects in their videos that like would rival like a major high budget music video right now.
That is like the kind of wild west with some of the tech now that you can kind of make yourself step up. You
Hmm.
can step up to a level that was almost impossible 5 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
very much so.
yeah, it's so impressive what you can do. And I've seen a lot of people kind of backing away from streaming and
Mhm.
going back to like, I want to go. They're going back to like college radio kind of indie roots. Like if I don't offer it on the streaming, right, and I make it so like I have a short run of like 5,000 vinyls and
Right.
or cassettes, and I have a fan base that follows me, and I've got my merch, and and I don't need to go in that direction. I might have reasons why I don't want to go in that direction, right?
Yeah.
That I want to keep it more. And there are kids today that appreciate that. It's like, hey, I want something more authentic.
Yeah.
I,
And I think too, like there's a lot of artists that are investing in vinyl now to have something to sell at shows. But like you said, the margin is almost better for them. I don't know if it necessarily is because you're losing money to pay for the production of it, but you have something tangible, like you said, that you could connect with that like that band or that fan is gonna, open that record up and be like, that's my friend that's on that. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like those are my people that are on that record. So it hits on a completely different level.
yeah. And I think is what happens when you do that, you get fans that actually listen to your entire album instead
Mhm.
of listening to a curated playlist. What I
Right.
like about indie bands and indie artists is a lot of their fans know their work versus like kind of like the common fan that is a playlist surfer and maybe they're doing 5 other things at the same time. They're watching Netflix, TikTok, got their iPad open. They're not really serious like music fans. Like I'm a kind of a serious 1970s, in the basement listening to Pink Floyd, in the
Yeah.
basement listening to Sgt. Pepper's, and listening to the Who,
Mm,
Quadrophenia, and talking to my friends about it and being like not being distracted by other things. We're actually talking about the music.
yeah,
Like
totally.
like
Yeah, and like I mean, too, when it's somebody that because like I said, this is very much a music scene where if you don't know somebody, you know somebody that knows that person. So when you're like I have friends that are not musicians at all. They just like going to shows. They follow this one band to every show that they're at right now,
like
just because they
deadheads.
like what they do, and they bought a T-shirt from them, and they bought a hat from them, and they think like, they obviously know like the band is just doing their thing, but they're gonna go see those guys because they know them and they might run into them at the coffee shop the next day.
Yeah.
Like that's just how it happens here. So
That's interesting because you got people who really embrace like a musician life. They it's kind of like the kind of hippie culture of
mhm.
the Deadheads. People would follow the Dead. People follow the Allman Brothers everywhere they would go. You get people who get really diehard about that band, right? They
Ooh,
or they they get so into it. Like I remember the early REM fans. Like when I was in Northampton, they would follow them to Boston. They'd see him in
yeah,
Northampton. They'd go see him in Boston. They go see him like in New York. They would follow him because like they were just totally enamored with like what those guys were doing.
for
And
sure.
they were following like the smaller bands like the Husker Do's, the Black Flags, like the
Right.
smaller bands had really diehard fanatic, not crazy fans, but they were just really passionate about being into something they thought was really, I don't know, it was talking to them.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was a buzz too, right? Like about, hey, you got to see these guys while they're still little because they're not gonna be forever, right?
Mhm.
I think in the case of some of the bands that you mentioned, there was always that feeling probably of like, they're going to be something pretty big. So you better enjoy this while you can. With this, with our scene that we have here in Milwaukee, I think there's definitely always that potential of like these guys could be big. But then, like I said, there's always that also feeling of like, who are they going to bring with them? Maybe if I love this band, Social Sig, and I love seeing them all the time, when they bring on a band like Bug Moment to come play a show with them because they like them, or a band called Shuby because they like them and they're going to go see them. If you only know Social Sig, you're immediately open to those other two bands because you
Yeah,
like that one band and they like them. Like immediately you're
also
like, well, if they're playing with them, I might like them.
kinda like the grunge scene or kinda like, the SST scene, like, if you listen to SST back in the day, you most of the people would listen to every band on SST.
Right.
Most of the guys
Exactly.
I knew, they would, like just at Black Flag, they would go listen to all the like, Meat Puppets and all these other bands, so they just go and some of them didn't really get that big, right? Some of them were, like, where they stayed kinda low, and
Mhm.
but that the whole idea was, like, I like that indie scene. I like these singer-songwriters, and they're not perfect. It's kinda like the idea like Joe Strummer,
Right.
Joey Ramone. You don't have to be it was a rebellion against the progressive rock and like the Jimmy Pages, the Eric
Yeah.
Claptons. There was this idea, well, that's too much perfection. Let's have some like authenticity. Let's have it like, people felt like in London, like I could be Joe Strummer. Yeah.
Right.
you
Right.
know,
Right. Exactly.
let's
Well,
do
there's
that.
like, I remember hearing one time that there was a story. It was on a Ramones VHS tape I had years and years ago. That like the first time that the Ramones went overseas to London and went to England, like they played a tour and bands like the Sex Pistols were like carrying their guitars for them, right? Like they were just, or the people that would become the Sex Pistols would,
Mhm.
carry guitars for them around and hang out with them and whatever. And they would leave and 20 bands would pop up after that because everybody went, I can do that,
Yeah.
and yeah, that's still true to this day. I think for some people that want to get into making music, especially on the independent scene in the independent world, is you see people on TikTok now, or I guess, right? That's their way of discovering them, or
Yeah.
Instagram or whatever, and being like, hey, they're making something cool in their room. I've always wanted to try and make music. Maybe I can do this too. Because now all of a sudden they're finding their audience and they're getting huge, thousands and thousands of followers, like that might entice somebody to be like, well, I can give it a swing, and maybe it's
Yeah.
not going to be as popular, but I can at least see, you know.
There's that punk aesthetic that allows you to like it's possible that
Right, exactly.
you could be Joe Storm, you could be Joey Ramone, you could be Bob Mould, Grant Hart. You could go do that.
Right.
The idea, like I always like bands that were never kind of unsung bands, like the Velvets, like
Mhm.
yeah, Alex Chilton and Big Star.
Yeah.
Yeah, that Big Star was like a big thing for me back in the day because like it's like I was like, oh, I found this band like the Velvets. Nobody knows them but other producers.
Right.
This
Yeah.
other musicians know who they are.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And that's how it is with a lot of these bands when they start out, especially for me. I get that feeling all the time of like, man, nobody's heard these guys yet. I'll put them on the website and like hopefully they get something from it. But then like also, I mean, now I've kind of evolved too, where I host a radio show every Friday night on FM 1021 in Milwaukee. And I get to play all Milwaukee bands for an hour.
Oh,
And
that's
I can
awesome.
play somebody that might never have gotten a chance to be on that radio station otherwise because they just didn't know the right person or whatever. But that
Yeah,
comes
no
from digging
payola.
through.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, there's that too, and I don't think that that's as necessarily as big here on the local level. But like, you know what I mean? Like, you can play somebody's band that made something in a DIY space,
yeah,
and
yeah.
it sounds great, and like that would be unheard of years and years and years ago. You would have to get your tape to the right DJ, or either get your tape to the right DJ, or have somebody, like you said, probably pay somebody to get the word out about you. And that isn't the case anymore. Now you could just make something good on the internet and it might change you, it might change your life.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, there's so many tools that have been given to people from like the MPC to like, DAWs. So, DAWs, they're not just for hip hop and EDM. You got full rock bands that can produce on DAWs.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
And
you,
now with the technology, it's getting even better to like the point where I'm hearing stuff that's made in home studios that you couldn't tell me that it wasn't made and mastered and created. Like there's people that are meticulous that sound like a high quality record, whereas
yeah,
back in the day, like you could definitely tell like, okay, this is homemade just on the limitations of the tech at the time, right? Or you could hear it was recorded to tape or whatever.
yeah,
Not so
the
much
technology.
anymore.
Yeah, the
It's
technology is just amazing what you can do in the mixing and the plugins and all the things that you can do.
Yeah.
It's just amazing in terms of the do it yourself aspects of it. Like you can't really justify going to Olympia Studios or going to the record plant or going to Electric Lady when like
Right.
you can actually do it.
Right.
If
But
you
I
don't
do
have the
think,
budget to do it, I mean, if you had the budget and somebody gave you the money, yeah, fine, go to record plant.
yeah, I do think that ultimately, if I was in a band, I would probably be like, okay, we have to rent a studio to like make the final product, but you can make a demo that is so close now, that is so close to the final product that all you have to do is go in there and lay it down the way you want it to. I think it's going to change the way that like people operate in studios, right? Because there used to be the rush of like, hey, we only booked 3 hours, so you might only get one or two takes at this, and we
Yeah,
got to move on because we got to get this thing done. And for better or worse, like that might have created a lot of, the perfectly imperfect music that we heard, right? Was people saying, hey, we can only afford 3 hours of this, so nail this take or we're screwed. And now it's like you can make something so pristine and then just bring it into a studio and be like, here's the final, I just need to record it this way and it's
yeah,
ready to go,
yeah. Just the final mix, just doing what a recording engineer does to kind of just add the color, add
right.
add
Or
add,
or
add
it's recorded on a better microphone or whatever.
yeah, yeah. You just be able to like step up your game and just
For
have
sure.
better
Yeah.
processing on everything. But I think it's just the indie scene has always appealed to me, like the college radio scene, because I like to hear like the newfound sound. Like I'm a synthesist. I do a lot of sound design. Before I
Okay.
ever get to anything, I spend hours on my Moog just coming up with the tone.
Hmm.
Um, and I've always been, attracted to people who are doing something different, right? Even if it's like the punk genre, like there's a certain standard punk genre, right?
Yeah.
Idea, but there's still an approach. Like
Yeah.
if you approach it, it's like, oh, that's different than what Bob Mould would have done. That's different than what Paul Westerberg would have done. This guy
Mhm.
has a different mindset, a point of view, and a way of doing it. His voice, like everybody's voice, sometimes is so integral to the sound. And when you hear
Right.
this new voice of a young punk, like or somebody who's a hip hop guy, and he's like, he's not mimicking De La Soul, but he's doing
Right.
something kind of old school. And maybe
Yeah.
that's not what's hip anymore, but he's actually doing it in a way that's more even super interesting. That to
Yeah.
me is why I like to listen to independents because they're willing to kind of do that.
Yeah, and I'm experiencing that. I mean, within recent years, especially like in our hip hop scene, in recent years, there's been this trend. They call it low end music here in Milwaukee, and it doesn't sound like traditional hip hop at all. It's more like juke music out of Chicago. If I had to compare it to anything, but it's really unique to Milwaukee and maybe like the Upper Midwest kind of thing.
Hmm.
Maybe a little bit of Detroit right now too, but like that I'm experiencing for the first time, like hearing the genre shift locally. Like for a long time, I could tell you exactly what Milwaukee hip hop sounded like, especially on both sides, the artsy side, and then the more like we used to call it jack music back in the day. Now there's this like low end sound that is shifting and changing the parameters on things. There's kids that are doing more like hyper pop stuff, which sounds kind of like a little bit like pop punky and like
Hmm.
a little more electronic at times, but fusing in some hip hop stuff. So it's really interesting to see like the generation change and to hear a whole new group of people ushering in a different sound locally.
Yeah, I love cross genre when somebody takes something from electronica and then mixes it with punk or mixes it with hip hop or put like Afro futurism and then they throw some jazz on it or throw something else. Like when you cross genre or you take a different approach and then it's
Yeah,
like then you end up with this hybrid or you end up
right.
with these different zones because like everybody wants, the industry likes to just replicate whatever is
Mm,
successful. And hopefully the kids are like rebelling against that and want to be like I want something more authentic. I want something more vulnerable. I want it to mean something.
right. And all it takes really is now one or two kids to latch onto that sound, right? Like there was a couple kids making videos that were really pushing that low end sound at first, and nobody really kind of knew what it was, but it was firing them up and they liked it. And then all of a sudden I saw like established artists start making that sound because they're like, well, this is what the kids are listening to on the internet, like, and so it does kind of force their hand a little bit to be like, okay, progress, like make something new, make something that's completely unique to Milwaukee, make something that's unique to your
See,
neighborhood even, right? And so like that's how things get created. That's how, if we really want to talk about it, like that's how punk got created. That's how, art rock and things like that happen, is because people say, okay, I'm going to try something that you haven't heard before. Let's see what we can
yeah,
make with this.
yeah, yeah. Peter Gabriel Genesis, yeah, the early
Yeah.
Genesis, like the very prog rock, the early Yes, because people wanted to push it. They were college kids,
Right.
pushing it. And but
Yeah.
they were pushing it from an artistic point of view. But then what I liked about the punk aesthetic is like, I don't have to be like, at the talent level at Genesis or
Yeah.
the level
There
of a Yes. I can just have the heart. I can have the heart and I'm not gonna be like a master like Clapton or Jeff Beck or something, but I can still get it across.
Right, and there was beauty in that, like, sloppiness of it too, which, like, I mean, there is still now with some of, like, the more hyper pop stuff, you'll hear songs where, like, the bass is fully blown out and, like, maybe the raps aren't, like, the verses aren't totally, like, perfectly syncopated out,
Mhm.
but there's beauty in that,
Yeah,
and,
yeah,
like,
there's something about that. It's
and
kinda
that's, like,
ramshackle.
or like, yeah, or like funk music, you know what I mean? Like the best funk records are the ones that sound like they were rushed.
No, like
They're the ones
Funkadelic,
that
like,
sounds
you listen to Funkadelic, it's not perfect,
yeah, oh,
it's
by
actually
no means.
imperfect.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know?
those are the things that like that there's beauty in that like humanness of it, of like this is just they were putting this out and we didn't make it perfect for you, but you get the idea and you're going to get into it because of that. Like that's where the energy is kind of like stored in a record, you know?
But it's like I love about like Neil Young and Crazy Horse. Because here it's
Yeah.
Neil Young, he was in Buffalo, Springfield, he's in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and then he kind of creates a punk band with Crazy Horse.
Right.
Crazy Horse was a lot more sloppy, right, compared to what he was doing on Harvest or stuff he was doing with Buffalo, Springfield, or anything he was doing with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. They were more, let's get it perfect, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when he talked about like Crazy Horse, he said, "I'm going to go into the ditch." It's like he said, like I don't want to be perfect. I want to have that kind of the grandfather of the punk aesthetic. Like you listen to his Crazy Horse albums, he is purposely not doing it in perfect timing. They're actually making mistakes and putting them on record.
Well, things like that. I mean, MC5, New York Dolls, stuff like that, right? Like we're intentionally like had the like rock star look and feel, but it was about a completely different attitude and being able to say, we're going to do it our way. We're going to do it the way that we like it. You know, we're going to turn it up just a little bit louder than maybe your nice stereo system wants us to. And that created something entirely different. And that influenced down the line, like the next genre or, you know, the next group of people, like from garage rock to punk.
Yeah. I mean, that's the other Kurt Cobain's always was talking about Neil. And and Pearl Jam was always talking about the Who and like Pete Townsend. Because I mean, Pete Townsend's like the ultimate, the high numbers. I mean, they were like pretty much a punk band. I mean, the Who is, even though they're a progressive rock band, it does like Tommy.
Yeah. No, I was very fortunate.
Really punk.
Yeah, I was very fortunate growing up that I had an uncle that really loved the Who. And I would hear, you know, I would hear things like Quadrophenia and stuff like that when like in his car. Or Tommy or things like that. But more often than not, he liked the like, you know, like Boris the Spider, like the weird mighty meaty bouncy, whatever that record is.
Stuff. Yeah, the early
stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Like, and that was the stuff that definitely had more of an edge to it. And I would gravitate towards that stuff too, because like it just had that feeling of perfectly imperfectness.
Like my generation. I mean, he's got that stutter. You know, he's doing that stutter on purpose. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on purpose. But it also at the time was something that you never heard.
You don't do that.
You know what I mean? You had vocal groups and everything was perfect 4-part harmonies, and you know, everybody landed and hit every bar the way that they were supposed to because they were classically trained, probably, right? Yeah. And then you have this guy come up and he stutters his lines and he sounds a little weird, and that guy's playing a 5-string bass and it's bouncing all over the place and it sounds weird and it just sounds like ramshackle.
The thing about the Who, I always like one of my best friends talking about is like everybody's playing lead, which except for Pete. Pete's kind of playing like he's actually controlling the rhythm through the guitar.
You know,
he's keeping the rhythm. Like Moon and Entwistle were kind of going lead bass, lead drummer.
Right. You know what's very amazing to me is I saw a video of this one time and I don't remember which drummer it was, but they broke down like a Keith Moon drumming part, and they'll play like he played the break straight, but then he would play like the little accents in between parts you know, in between lines of the song. That's when you'd hear him kind of like crazy, like all over the place.
Oh yeah, like soloing all the time. It's like he's not keeping time like Ringo. He's not,
right.
Like Bonham and Ringo are kind of keeping structure, right?
Yeah, he would play the break straight, but then the part that you would always hear is him getting crazy in between little flourishes in between verses and things like that. And like you would never like the instrumental part of the record, he would just play like a Ringo, like a regular drummer. But then when it came down to it, he would make his mark like as everybody else was singing and playing and doing their thing.
Yeah, it's almost like I always felt like he's trying to be a lead drummer.
Yeah,
he's trying to get the attention that Daltrey gets as the lead singer that Pete would get if he was more like an Eddie Van Halen, but he's not.
Right.
Pete's actually keeping like the chords, you know, is the actual rhythm of the song is coming from Pete's chords.
Right. Totally. Yeah.
And then Entwistle was soloing like a jazz guy. He's soloing like a fusion modal jazz bass player.
Right. And it's not like a weird 5-string bass that, you know, maybe they only made one of, or one was available in like all of England, so it just
Yeah,
had a completely unique tone and uniqueness about it.
they're kind of the craziness is it's chaos on stage. You don't know if they're gonna fall apart. You don't know if they're gonna get into a fight. You don't know if they're gonna blow up the stage. That was kind of like the punk aesthetic of the Who that I think inspired, a lot of punks. If you ask them,
Oh,
they'll
very
they'll
much
they'll
so.
bring up the Who all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. And yeah, you can hear that in bands, to this day still, right? Like some of the best bands right now. I went and saw Amyl and the Sniffers. They're a
Mhm.
punk band from Australia. They're in I saw them play in Madison. And what comes across to me is that feeling of like you don't really know what's about to happen next.
Yeah,
Like you hear the songs, you love the songs, but it is tinging on like just that
yeah.
borderline of like something chaotic could happen at any moment. Or like there's like a band like Viagra Boys that just played Riot Fest and played a few other like big shows in the area. They're a nationally touring band, but like it has this like funky groove to it, but you don't know what the lead singer is gonna say next, right?
Right
Like
on.
so
I like
that
that.
like that still exists in bands now, and that's definitely a product of previous generations.
But that's what I like to see because a lot of people are like, I always tell my friend, he's like, "Oh, what's going on with music?" I said, "You need to actually look in the underground and check
Mhm.
out the local scenes." As being this podcast, I've had a lot of bands on that were like emerging independent bands that are not big, right?
Right.
But I like to be able to give them a space to talk.
Mhm.
As an offer to you guys, like if you ever wanted, to kind of get your bands interviewed on a podcast, could send them my way to kind of elevate. We could have a whole, period where we talk to like certain bands from your zone, if you want to.
Right. Yeah, and like honestly, with something like Milwaukee too, because we only have a limited number of media outlets here, right? So if somebody's doing something and one outlet picks it up, maybe all of them pick it up. So like maybe the same 7 or 8 artists really are consistently getting covered here. But if it's something where it's like you got to see these guys, like what I do is small enough that you can still hear that chatter of people like at shows being like, you got to see these guys because they sound amazing. Well, then I'll go see them and discover their music and write that on my site. So people come to my site being like, what are people talking about? Who are people talking about? So they kind of get to tap into the whole city just through my outlet, you know?
Mhm. So breaking and entering is like where'd you come up with the idea for the title?
Yeah, so the name so years and years ago when I was leaving high school and going into college at Marquette, a buddy of mine and I were going to do a podcast in 2009. And had we had kept the podcast, it would have been, the boom of podcasting would have happened around us. But we were telling our friends because we were staying off campus and they were living in the dorms. We were gonna say like we were like, oh well, we'll record our podcast at your dorm. And one of our friends, she was like, well, you're gonna have to call it breaking and entering because that's the only way that we'll ever let you come in to record your podcast in our place. So we named it Breaking and Entering. We never ended up doing an episode out of their dorm room at all. But that was always the running joke is because we didn't have a name. So it was
Mhm.
like, all right, cool. It's kind of grown to like if you want to interpret as to like people breaking and entering into the music scene, like,
Yeah.
okay, you could do that. But it just stems from like being able to record a podcast back in the day and saying, like, we're just gonna do it at your dorm. We're gonna record it out of there so we don't have to find a studio. So yeah,
That's
that's where it originated from.
that's the backstory. That's cool. So
Yeah.
are there what are you listening to right now in terms of like who's really like you know on your repeat list?
Right now, as far as bands, especially in Milwaukee, the indie bands are there. There's a lot of bands that are just crushing it at the moment. There's a band called Diet Light that I really like. There's a band called Bug Moment that reminds me of like the pop punk stuff that I grew up on. So for you, it might have been like, you had SST records where you listened to the whole label. I had Victory Records, which were great at marketing themselves and being like, if you like Hawthorne Heights, you're going to like Taking Back Sunday. You're going to like The
Mhm.
Sleeping, you're gonna like all these other bands, right? Bug Moment reminds me of those bands back in the day,
Oh,
like the
that's
early
cool.
emo stuff, but with like a new flair to it, which is different. There's kind of a punky sounding band called Scam Likely that just moved down to Chicago, but they're from Milwaukee. Originally, we had a show with them and a band called Fake My Death, and those guys crushed it. Like, were absolutely amazing, and definitely have a ton of potential. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on, but there
That's
are so
awesome.
many in like the indie rock scene and the like alternative rock scene right now in Milwaukee that are destined to do some really good things.
Do you feel like the industry is really kind of shortchanging indie rock with the focus on other genres?
Yes and no. I think like everything kind of moves in cycles. For me right now, like I grew up listening to a lot of punk, and then that became I listened to a lot of hip hop like when I was in high school and college, and because I was producing some hip hop at the time and making some beats and things like that. So that was more my focus, but I never really lost sight of it. But like in the recent years, like hip hop has felt just stale to me in general, like mainstream hip hop.
Yeah.
There's certainly people in Milwaukee that are making interesting stuff. So I think it all just moves in cycles in terms of like what's popular at the time and what is to the major label extent what's profitable at the time. Everything moves. There could be one band that's a great indie band that changes everything again, right?
Yeah, it could
Like
be
look at
like
the
another Nirvana.
yeah. Well, look at the early 2000s and that whole boom of like New York, like they call it indie sleaze now. It's not what we called it, at the time. We just called it indie rock. But when you had like the Strokes and the
Yeah,
Hives and the
sure.
Vines and
Mhm.
LCD Sound System and all of those kind of bands all coming up at the same time, like all you really need is one scene to absolutely blow
Erupt.
up
Like your
and
scene
then
could be
shift
the
it.
new Seattle, you know?
Yeah,
If the
exactly.
right band gets the right opportunity at the right moment
Yeah.
and they blow up, and then
Yeah.
all those bands like on Sub Pop will get carried along, and that's how you end up getting a grunge movement. Had massive, it wasn't just the Soundgardens, it wasn't just the Pearl Jams, it was all Mudhoney and all these other bands. There's a tons of other bands. Um,
Right. Exactly.
and that to me is exciting in a world because I have seen kind of hip hop become too standardized
Hmm.
and people having the same flow and the same beats and the same samples and the same
Yeah.
plugins. It's like you guys are using the same stuff. Like what?
Yeah.
Like yeah,
Yeah, it
where's the new
felt
ideas?
formulaic for sure. I do think it's also interesting now that like because we have streaming and we have the amount of music that's available to you at your fingertips at all times, I think we're gonna hit a point where music is gonna become very instead of black and white, very gray in terms of like grabbing bits of influence from hip hop, grabbing influence from rock. You already see it right now with acts like Kenny Hoopla, was born in Cleveland but lived in Oshkosh, Wisconsin for a long time. Like being able to blend all those different influences and have like a hip hop swagger, but maybe like a punk rock like sound.
Hmm.
And like that's something new and different. I just saw Ian Dior, and Ian Dior is doing the same kind of thing, and he's also making pop records too.
Hmm.
He makes stuff that has a punk sound to it. He can rap and he can make a pop song because he's heard all those different influences, and it doesn't take running to the store and buying all those different records or going to the library and renting, borrowing all those records. Like it doesn't take that anymore. And so now I think that the genre is definitely just kind of globbing together into something
Yeah.
unique.
Well, I think that's how I've always loved about music is the cross genre,
Mhm.
influence of things. We go
Right.
back to like Exile on Main Street. You know,
Yeah.
you have this cross genre with like country music with, you know, blues and
Right.
rock. And you get this kind of ramshackle Exile is kind of like the standard of the 70s kind of cosmic country blues all
Right.
mixed up with this kind of ramshackleness is like that was like it's still the standard today for
Yeah. Oh
for
yeah.
that thing. It's a cross genre, you know.
Yeah. And we get that here now. They're doing mixed genre shows sometimes at some places here in Milwaukee where you might see like a pop act will do a show, with like a hip hop artist or there'll be a rock band, but there'll be a guy that can also rap that is playing somewhere, maybe two sets before him. Like it
Mhm.
might open with a hip hop act and then get progressively heavier as the day goes on, as the show goes on or whatever. So like that that I think is a byproduct of just the internet in general and being able to have access to so much music, is that those worlds can kind of seamlessly merge together now, where it was not always the case, especially here.
Yeah, it's cool. Like we get that kind of cross between hip hop and other things, but like also country.
Mhm.
'Cause I'm a big fan of like maybe like a Johnny Cash type of country
Sure,
with like a
same.
hip hop attitude. Cause the Man in Black, it's kind of
Yeah,
kind of idea would kind of work with punk. It kind of worked with hip hop. You could
right.
have a cross, somebody being like echoing like what Cash did
Yeah.
with the same kind of aesthetic. That could be a really cool jam, collage thing.
Yeah, and I think we're starting to see it now, especially like I know there's so much of the pop country stuff, but then like there's a little bit of like trying to light the fire again of like a little bit of outlaw country stuff. I'm gonna see Chris Stapleton in like 2 weeks or something like that here in Milwaukee, or you have an act like Jelly Roll that
Yeah.
started off as a being able to make country songs and hip hop and do these things and like bring together those worlds in a way that shouldn't feel the way it does, but it works. I don't know how to describe it, but
Yeah, it works.
it's something new. Yeah, it just works.
Yeah, I would just like the idea. Well, I like Americana, like bands like the band,
Right.
and then mixing that with like the depth of what Dylan used to do with the lyrics
Mhm.
when he collaborated with them. Is like so if you could take that kind of outlaw and have that Johnny Cash attitude and
Yeah.
legitimacy, because it kind of
Right.
comes from that place. Is like he was singing at Folsom Prison. Right? He was actually had it wasn't just coming from like, "Oh, I lost my wife," or, "I'm angry at this guy." He actually would had kind of a mindset of the Man
Yeah.
in Black, and if you could get somebody that was, like, really tapped in to some kind of thing like that and be authentic, that would be super cool for me.
That's the key word, is authentic, right? Like especially now I think is so important. If you're an artist, it is so important for you to be authentic and to be true to the sound that you like and the music that you want to hear too. Because everything has become so synthesized and watered down on the mainstream level that
Mhm.
unless you really don't have a palate for this sort of thing and you just want to hear, all sweet all the time, you
Yeah,
can love pop music.
it's
But
the
if you
sound.
really want to make something that is going to like resonate with people, like you have to make the music that you want to hear, and like that is point blank going to be the most effective thing for you.
Yeah, it's like Paul Westerberg with The Replacements. Like, you get this very authentic, like, rock band. That's like
Right.
a punk rock band, but he's telling this very authentic story. It's very convincing
Yeah.
because it's real. It's real
Yeah.
as like what Pete was doing. And so that to me is really the bright light that you have breaking and entering that net. You got this scene. To me it's super encouraging. And I'm gonna talk to my friend who's always like where show me where the good music is. Like
Yeah, send them our way. We're
yeah.
there.
'Cause he's like, "I wanna find some good rock music, and I can't find it." Well, you do have to look for it, but it's not
Mhm.
where they want you to where the companies are sending you. You have to find it on your own.
Yeah, for sure. And we are definitely a haven of that sort of thing. I've always said like I've been fortunate enough to cover everything from the festival levels. Like I get to go to Lollapalooza and go to Summerfest in Milwaukee and Riot Fest in Chicago and things like that. But I also cover things that are kids making stuff in their basement that really make something good. And
Mhm.
like the beauty of what I do with breaking and entering is that it can hit both of those levels and be totally fine, and everything in the full spectrum in between.
That I like a full spectrum approach. I like the
Mhm.
more, expansive approach. We everybody likes these niches, and, I understand niches, but I'm more of like, I don't know what I want. So, like,
Mhm.
show me what's out there and like I can vibe with it. And
Yeah.
I'm always looking for that new thing. And it sounds
Yeah.
like that's where I think people are getting tired of being sent like the the equivalent of like a junk food music.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Like I said, like if you're into pop music, Yeah, and you just want candy all the time, sure. There's places to go for that. There's a lot of places. If you're fine with a little bit of salty with the sweet, we've got the place for that, I guess.
That's awesome. Well, I want to encourage people to check out breakingandentering.net. That will be fully clickable in the podcast description. We've been live on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. We will be on other platforms like Spotify for podcast. We'll be on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcast, Amazon Podcast, all those other channels, and we'll get a landing page to you guys. But thank you for being on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it so much, and keep doing what you're doing too, because we need platforms like this too, right?
Yeah. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too.